Hello, thank you for listening. My name is Chen Wei, and I want to tell you a story from a time when I was just 24 years old. Before the Americans gave me a rifle and put me inside a steel box, my world was built on straight lines and solid ground. I was a bricklayer from Chengdu. My hands were calloused and stained with the dust of Sichuan earth. I understood the quiet language of weight and balance. A good wall, you see, isn't just strong, it's smart. It knows how to carry a load, how to distribute pressure from the roof to the foundation, stone by patient stone. There's an honesty to it, a logic. You lay one brick true, then the next, and you can build something that will shelter a family for 100 years. I believed every problem had a solution you could build with your hands, a foundation you could trust. The war taught me that some things are only built to be broken. People think a tank is a fortress. They see the thick steel and the big gun and think you're invincible. They don't understand the truth. A tank isn't a fortress, it's a promise. A promise that the engine will start, that the tracks will turn, that the shell will leave the barrel. It's a machine built on 1,000 interlocking promises. And what happens when one of those promises shatters under you in the middle of a monsoon-drenched hell they called Myitkyina? The air inside the Sherman was always thick enough to drink. It was a cocktail of hot oil, sweat, and the lingering ghost of gunpowder. Outside, Burma was a suffocating green wall. The monsoon had turned the world to mud, a greedy, sucking mud that tried to swallow our 30-ton beast with every meter we gained. The heat was a living thing, pressing in on the steel hull until the inside felt like a baker's oven. We were 5 boys from China, sealed in an American can, trying to push the Japanese out of a town whose name I couldn't even pronounce correctly a few months before. Zhao Lei was driving. He was a farm boy from Hunan, barely 19, but his hands on the levers were as steady as a surgeon's. Lao Wang, our gunner, was older, a quiet man who squinted through his sight as if he could see the future. The commander, Sergeant Tan, was a constant voice of clipped commands in our ears, his tension a 5th crew member in the turret. And me, I was the loader. My job was simple. Take the shell from the rack, shove it into the breech, close it, and wait for the world to shake. It was a rhythm, a brutal mechanical dance. Find the target, load the shell, fire, watch a piece of the world disappear, repeat. Myitkyina wasn't a battle of grand charges. It was a slow, meat-grinding siege. We'd advance a few hundred meters, clear a bunker, and then get pushed back by a counterattack. The Japanese were dug in like ticks, hidden in shattered buildings and reinforced earthworks. Every tree, every ditch could hold a man with a magnetic mine or a Type 97 anti-tank rifle. We were moving up a narrow track, what used to be a road, flanked by the skeletons of colonial-era buildings. Rain hammered down on the hull, a frantic drumbeat against the deeper bass of our own engine. Sergeant Tan was directing fire at a machine gun nest spitting tracers from a 2nd-story window. Gunner, traverse right, target brick building, HE on the way. Lao Wang's movements were fluid, economical. The turret whined. I had the high-explosive shell already cradled, the cold brass a familiar weight in my hands. I slammed it home, slapped the breech, and shouted, "Up!" The cannon roared, and our world lurched back. The building vomited dust and brick. For a moment, the machine gun went silent, and then the world ended. It wasn't a boom. It was a physical blow, a giant's fist striking the side of our world. The sound was secondary to the feeling, a high-pitched, metallic scream of tearing steel that went right through my bones and into my soul. We were thrown against the interior walls like dice in a cup. My helmet cracked against the radio set, and a constellation of bright stars exploded behind my eyes. The tank lurched sideways, violently, and then nothing. A dead stop, a sickening, grinding crunch, and then an awful silence, punctuated only by the spattering rain and the panicked whine of the engine. "Driver, forward, move." Tan's voice was a raw nerve in the headset. "I'm trying, Sergeant." "She won't catch the track. I think the track is gone." Zhao Li's voice was a boy's again, high and thin with terror. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird. This was it, the fear. Not the fear of dying, but of asterisk, how asterisk. Of being stuck here in this steel coffin, while the enemy closed in. I could already smell the phantom scent of gasoline, could already feel the heat that wasn't there yet. We were a wounded beast, snarling but unable to move, a perfect target sitting in the open. The silence outside didn't last. It was replaced by a new sound. A sharp, insistent asterisk ping, 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 pang against our hull. Rifle fire, then the heavier, angrier thud of a machine gun finding our range. They knew we were crippled. They were coming for us. They're trying to flank us. Loader, periscope, see what you see, Tan yelled. I pushed myself up, my head swimming. Through the narrow slit of the periscope, the world was a blurry, terrifying green. Figures were moving through the ruins, low and fast. A mortar round landed 20 meters in front of us, showering the tank with mud and shrapnel. Each impact on the hull was a physical blow, a reminder of how thin our steel shell really was. "We have to bail out," Lao Wang said, his voice flat. "We stay here, we burn. Bail out into that," Tan shot back. "We'll be cut down before we take 2 steps. There's a whole platoon out there." He was right. Opening the hatch was suicide. Staying put was a death sentence on a timer. My thoughts were stripped gears, grinding uselessly. My hands, trained to load shells, felt clumsy and useless. What could I build here? What foundation could I lay against this tide of fire and steel? And then, as another round ricocheted off the turret with a demonic shriek, my bricklayer's mind stirred. Amid the panic, a question of simple physics emerged. What broke? Why are we stopped? It wasn't a question of tactics, it was a question of structure, of a failed component in a load-bearing system. "Driver," I said, my voice hoarse. "When you give it gas, what do you hear?" A grinding noise from the right side. The engine's fine, but the sprocket, it feels like it's just spinning free. The drive sprocket, the big toothed wheel at the front that pulls the track. It was our foundation. Without it, we were just 30 tons of useless metal. "I'm going out," I said. "Have you lost your mind, Chen?" Sergeant Tan grabbed my shoulder. "They'll tear you to pieces. We're dead if I don't," I replied, my voice calmer than I felt. "Let me just look. I have an idea." I didn't have an idea, not a full one, just a ghost of one. An instinct born from 1,000 days of solving problems with leverage and support. Tan stared at me for a second that stretched into an eternity. The pings on the hull were getting more frequent. He saw something in my eyes, I suppose. Not bravery, just a desperate, quiet determination. He nodded once. "You have 30 seconds, 30 seconds, Chen Wei." Taking a deep breath that tasted of metal and fear, I twisted the handle of the loader's hatch. The moment it cracked open, the sound of the battle flooded in, a monstrous, overwhelming roar. I pushed it up and scrambled out, keeping my body as flat against the hull as I could. The rain was cold, a shock to my sweat-soaked uniform. Bullets zipped past my head with a sound like tearing cloth. The world outside was a nightmare of smoke, mud, and muzzle flashes. I crawled on my belly to the front of the tank, the hot engine vibrating beneath me. I peered over the edge. It was worse than I thought. The shell hadn't just broken the track. It had taken a huge chunk out of the massive drive sprocket, and the track had slipped off, lying limp and broken in the mud. The tank's own weight had driven the edge of the broken sprocket deep into the earth. We weren't just immobile, we were anchored to our own grave. My 30 seconds were almost up. Panic began to claw at my throat again. It was hopeless. The damage was too severe. We needed a wrecker, a full repair crew, a workshop, not one man with his bare hands in a firefight. My eyes darted around, searching for, I didn't know what, cover, a weapon, and then I saw them. Lying in the rubble of the building we had just shelled, bricks, broken but solid, and next to them a thick, splintered timber from a collapsed roof beam, and a piece of bent steel plate, maybe from a destroyed cart. Brick, timber, steel. The components of construction, the components of a foundation. The idea struck me then, fully formed and terrifyingly simple. It wasn't a military idea. It was a bricklayer's solution. I wasn't going to fix the sprocket. I was going to build a ramp, a temporary foundation to lift the tank's weight off the broken part and give the track something, anything, to grip. I slid back into the tank, pulling the hatch shut behind me. The sudden quiet was deafening. "It's bad," I gasped, my lungs burning. "The sprocket is shattered, but I think I can do something." "Do what? Rebuild it by hand?" Lao Wang scoffed. "No," I said, looking at Zio Li. "Driver, listen to me very carefully. When I tell you, I need you to put it in reverse, gently, just enough to take the weight off the front right sprocket. Do you understand?" He nodded, his eyes wide. "Sergeant, cover me, everything you've got. Suppressing fire on that building." Tan didn't question me again. "Machine gun, fire at will, keep their heads down." The coaxial machine gun roared to life, a blessed wave of noise that gave me a sliver of cover. I went out again. This time I didn't crawl. I ran, hunched over, a strange calm settling over me. The bullets were still there, but they felt distant. My world had shrunk to the task at hand. I grabbed the heaviest, most intact brick, the length of timber, and the bent steel plate. They were heavy, clumsy. I dragged them back to the front of the tank, my muscles screaming. I lay on my side in the mud, the noise of the battle fading into a dull roar in my ears. I could feel the familiar heft of the brick. For a second I wasn't in Burma. I was back in Chengdu, the sun warm on my back, the scent of dust and tea in the air. I remembered my master telling me, "A brick is a prayer, you place it with intention." My intention was to live. I shoved the steel plate deep into the mud, angling it up towards the track. Then I wedged the brick under it, creating a solid base. Finally, the timber. I worked it under the hanging, limp track, using the brick and steel as a fulcrum. I was building a crude, powerful lever. My hands were raw, bleeding, but I didn't feel it. I was a builder again. I was creating a system to manage a load. I hammered on the hull with my fist, the signal. Now, reverse, slowly. I screamed over the din. Inside, I knew Xiao Li would be easing the lever back. The engine note changed. The massive machine groaned. It shifted backwards, maybe only a few centimeters, but it was enough. The immense weight lifted off the broken sprocket. With a final, desperate heave, I shoved the end of the timber ramp directly into the path of the track links. "Okay, forward, slowly, go," I yelled, scrambling away. The tank lurched. The track began to move. It scraped against my makeshift ramp. The timber groaned, threatening to splinter into 1,000 pieces under the strain. For a terrible second, I thought it would fail. The track slipped, grinding against the steel plate. Then it caught, just for a moment. It bit into the wood, and with a sound of protesting, tortured metal, the tank pulled itself forward. 1 meter, 2 meters. I scrambled back to the hatch and fell inside, gasping for air, my body shaking uncontrollably. The tank was moving, dragging its wounded side, a horrifying screech of metal on mud accompanying our retreat. We were a crippled wreck, but we were moving. We pulled back behind the dubious cover of a ruined wall. The engine died, and the silence that fell was absolute. No one spoke. Xiao Li had his head buried in his arms over the controls. Lao Wang was staring at me, his mouth slightly open. Sergeant Tan just sat, his hand still on the machine gun's trigger, his knuckles white. He looked at me, his eyes full of a kind of awe I had never seen before. "Bricklayer," he said, his voice quiet. "You crazy bricklayer." I went back to Chengdu after the war. I built many things: houses, schools, walls to keep people safe. I married, had children. My hands grew old doing the work they were meant to do. But I never looked at a foundation the same way again. A building, a tank, a country, they're all the same. They are only as strong as their weakest point. And sometimes the only thing holding it all together isn't new steel or perfect stone, but a desperate idea and the will to see it through with a broken brick and a splintered piece of wood. War doesn't teach you how to build. It teaches you how much things weigh. The weight of a friend's life, the weight of a steel shell, the weight of a single, desperate choice made in the mud and the rain. You learn that in the face of total collapse, you don't find perfect solutions. You find a temporary brace. You find a way to hold on for 1 more minute, 1 more meter. And sometimes that's enough to be called a victory. This memory is a piece of shrapnel I carry. It's heavy. Help me carry it. Subscribe and ensure these stories are never left to rust in silence.